Welcome back on the AM show. You know how we do it. It's a Friday, and I'm going to give you my gift for this morning, my blunt thoughts. Wherever you are, thank you for joining us. Today, I've titled my blunt thoughts, Ghana's Gye Nyame economy, hypocritical Christian groups, and the raw suffering of the masses. Now, in the book Why Nations Fail by Darren Acemoglu and James Robinson, they write of how in the summer of 1945, as the Second World War was drawing to a close, the Japanese colony in Korea began to collapse. Within a month of Japan's August 15 unconditional surrender, Korea was divided at the 38th parallel into two spheres of influence. The South was administered by the United States, the North by Russia. The uneasy peace of the Cold War was shattered in June 1950 when the North Korean army invaded the South. Initially, the North Koreans made large inroads, capturing the capital city, Seoul. By the autumn, however, they were in full retreat. It was then that Hwang Pyong-won and his brother were separated. Hwang Pyong-won managed to hide and avoid being drafted into the North Korean army. He stayed in the South and worked as a pharmacist. Dragged apart in 1950, the two brothers met again in the year 2000 in Seoul for the first time in 50 years, after the two governments agreed to initiate a limited program of reunification. As a doctor, Hwang's brother had ended up working for the Air Force, a good job in a military dictatorship. But even those with privileges in North Korea don't do that well. When the brothers met, Hwang asked about life in North Korea. Hwang had a car, his brother didn't. He had a telephone, his brother didn't. Even Hwang's daughter, who worked at the foreign ministry, had a telephone. Hwang recalled how all the people from the North at the reunion were asking for money, so he offered some to his brother. But his brother said, "If I go back with the money, the government will say, 'Give that money to us,' so keep it." Hwang noticed his brother's coat was threadbare, so he offered him the new one he was wearing instead. "I can't do that," his nervous and ill at ease brother said. And this is what he followed up with. "This is just borrowed from the giver to come here." His brother was poorer than he had imagined. He looked awful and was thin as a rake. The people of South Korea have living standards similar to those of Portugal and Spain. To the north, living standards are akin to those here in sub-Saharan Africa, about 1/10 of living standards in South Korea. But here's where it gets really interesting. These striking differences, just as when you consider the differences between Ghana's economic situation and those of the Asian tigers in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, are not ancient. In fact, they did not exist prior to the end of the Second World War. But after 1945, the different governments in North and South Korea adopted very different ways of organizing their economies. South Korea was led, and its early economic and political institutions were shaped by the Harvard and Princeton educated Syngman Rhee. That made the difference. In the North, Kim Il-sung established himself as a dictator by 1947 and introduced a rigid form of centrally planned economy which outlawed private property. Twin countries with a single umbilical cord and market economies, yet their outcomes were so different. Here too in Ghana, our stark reality is that while we have the Ivy League trained economists and what have you, they have shown over time that they have nothing really to show, beyond their academic degrees, that is. Else, how could we be in such economic mud today? Make no mistake, brothers and sisters, we currently are in a Gye Nyame economy. Because Charlie, check like Adina Jinsim. If God does not intervene, we would find ourselves up the proverbial creek without a paddle. Mr. President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo said very recently, "My government is not to be blamed for going to the IMF." Hey, Mr. President, we shouldn't blame you. And can you blame me when Alassane Ouattara and Muhammadu Buhari? What a bunch of baloney. Did you, Mr. President, not tell us that you had secured our economy, our country, with your Vice President, Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, in whom God had reposed the entirety of the world's wisdom? How could he then, as the repository of all this wisdom and as head of government's economic management team, have left us in the lurch? How could he have failed us so badly? And even worse, how could you, Mr. President, have overseen all of this, have looked on while all of this crass work was happening? I suppose we have to go back to that tree proverb that aptly says, "Kwatre kwa si obema wontoma tie ni din." Obviously, viewing things through the lenses of President Akufo-Addo and his cohorts, they are to be blamed for none of the perils we face today as a country. That, however, is in stark contrast to what Mr. President felt, thought, and espoused when former Presidents Atta Mills and Mahama were at post. Then opposition leader Akufo-Addo blamed Mahama for a bad economy, hence the need for an IMF program. But today, Mr. President says we shouldn't blame his administration for going to the IMF. It's double standards everywhere you look. But what exactly did Mr. President say? He said recently, in fact, the big difference that we are having in Ghana today and why we have gone back to the IMF is that everybody recognizes it is not as a result of my mismanagement, as was the case during the tenure of the previous government. The reality is that there are global inflation, high commodity prices, among others, and all these have been the principal reasons for the difficulties we are having as a country. Really, Mr. President? Like, seriously? Were you thinking same in 2015 when you lampooned the former administration for going to the IMF and posted on Twitter, quote, for the first time in history, an oil-rich country, some 5 years into oil production, is seeking a bailout from the IMF? But this gets even more hilarious, Ghana 4. In an access of showing off, President Akufo-Addo, Nana Showboy, in 2019 in Worcester, Massachusetts, said that the IMF program then should be our last. But oh you were, here we are. What happened, Mr. President, for you to eat your words just 3 years later? What possibly could have happened? I'll tell you what happened. Worse financial and fiscal indiscipline than that which you accused the former president of. That's what happened. Thanks to our gargantuan debt for which we have ever so little to show, we are back again at the doors of the IMF for a bailout. What the MPP is subtly telling us, Ghana 4, is this. The incompetence of the NDC led us to the IMF in 2015, but now the MPP's competence has taken us back there in 2022. I mean, how farcical can this administration be? Where are the men we were promised? Where is the solid economic management team? I was spending some 240 Ghana cedis to fill my 1.6-litre engine's tank in 2021. Just yesterday, I spent 508 cedis, 10 pesos. That is a 141.67% increment in what I had to pay just last year. And this lasts me for just about 5 days of not too much going round. So just imagine how much I am going to spend on fuel alone in a month. My feeding hasn't been factored into the conversation. Utility bills, rent, medicals, and all haven't come in yet. My mother's bills have not been looked at. Ading, what then am I working for? To live from hand to mouth? But this is exactly what happens when an economy becomes rabid, infecting the people in it with virulent fiscal diseases. And you think I have no right to be upset? You see, when Kwesi Cheidakwa, KKD for short, came on my show 2 days ago and spoke about how he was being persecuted for speaking truth to power and how even his father had been bombarded with calls and feared for his life, I realized this was much worse than I had imagined. If the wet leaves are burning, then imagine what the dry ones like us are going through. But be silenced we shall not. We shall not be shut up. No muzzle is big enough to make us pretend not to see what ails this government is visiting on the people who have done no wrong but to vote them into power. And is this how they pay us back? Just about a week ago, Justice Sai posted something that I'll be reflecting on shortly. In fact, just hold right there for me. Let's take a look at what is happening here. The effect of inflation on purchasing power. If we take what supposedly those at the China Mall are earning, 580 cedis, monthly salary scenario. Look at the averages. A year before, 580 cedis was 580 cedis. The value of that in 2019 reduced to 538.82 cedis. In 2020 to 485 plus cedis. In 2021 to 436 cedis. Ghana 4, today, if you make 580 cedis, that value has been reduced to 298.42 Ghana cedis. But how much value has a salary of 580 Ghana cedis lost due to inflation? Take a look at this. In 2019, 41 plus cedis was lost. In 2020, 53 plus cedis was lost. In 2021, 48 plus cedis was lost. Currently, 138 cedis has been shaved off. You can do the math depending on your own salary. And finally, in terms of an increment in base pay of public sector workers since 2010, look at where we were. 18% in 2012 in terms of increment year on year. Look at 2013, 10%. There was no increment in 2014. 15% in 2015. back to 10% in 2016, 12.5% in 2017. Since that time, it's been a steady decline, 4%, the lowest in 2021, and now at 7%. Let me wrap with this. Justice Sai on August 12, Justice Sai posted this, and I feel it is relevant. A few weeks ago, spokespersons were citing U.S. gas prices in defense of the painful increases in fuel prices in Ghana. This was without regard for the fact that Ghanaian workers earn in 5 days what the American worker earns in 1 hour. Today, the average national gas price in the U.S. is down to $3.99. It has declined by $1.03 and has been declining for 58 days in a row. This means that a two-car family has saved $110, the equivalent of about 1,000 Ghana cedis in a month. This is what governments do. They turn things around. But what do our governments here do? Here, a few people were given water and electricity that was supposed to be free. Guess what? We're still paying for what we were told was gratis, to the point where we have overpaid for our sin of thinking we were actually getting something for free, and yet still have to pay the COVID-19 levy. And this government is still heaping more levies and utility tariffs on our heads by the day. But you see, the people have a way of having the last laugh. Do you see what stubbornness has yielded by way of what we are scraping from the e-levy? Less than 7% of what was projected to be generated. That is what happens when a government fails to listen to the people and work in their interest. When push comes to shove, the people will show you exactly where power lies. The hoi polloi, the masses, will show you. The crass arrogance of this administration and just how little credit they give us by way of lucid thinking is what rubs my craw and stokes my anger. Obidie na oninyan senti na yako IMF na monswe. But another sticking point about which we cannot retch is the hypocrisy of some Christian groupings who now ask us, the people, to pray for God's intervention for the economy, when those same people, Pharisaic as they are, were praying for wisdom, knowledge and understanding, common sense for the former administration's leaders. What vile hypocrisy. Back then, was it because our leaders were bereft of ideas? And now, is it not owing to same or much worse? Are today's leaders immune to the same shortfalls in thinking and creativity? Is it now because God has rejected us that our economy is in the toilet? Does that explain why we wander in this economic wilderness? You see, being a staunch Catholic Christian, it is even more serious when respected Christian figures cover their heads like the Pharisees with veils of hypocrisy. I personally fiercely criticized John Mahama on many things that I felt were not right. If today, Akufo-Addo does worse, which in my books is what he is doing, how can I pretend everything is A-okay? To what end? There will be no distinctions here. What is wrong is wrong. What is stupid is stupid. No seasoning here. Why should we pander to massaging people's egos when our motherland is running aground? If we fail on this national journey and Ghana caves in, we'll have rubble not crush us all. In fact, God forbid. But I can guarantee that if the country were to go under, our misleaders would be the first to run away, just as the Sri Lankan president did with his tail between his legs. But we cannot afford to get there, which is why we must do everything to avert such a catastrophe. When I speak this passionately, it is because I am Ghanaian through and through, and I love my country. My name is Benjamin Akapo. These are my blunt thoughts served to you, raw, unedited, undiluted. God bless Ghana.